Hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial, we are going to make this beautiful double glitter peekaboo tumbler for my friend. Bless her heart, it has been so long since she asked for this, but we are finally finishing it up. It's just been crazy over here with the regular life aside from Brittany Barnes Boutique. So we already have a glitter tumbler I did long ago for her. So we're going to go ahead and head over to Creative Fabrica, and we're going to grab our stencils that we're going to cut on stencil vinyl. I do use Etsy for some things, but my go-to is Creative Fabrica because if you have a subscription with Creative Fabrica, you pay a very small amount every month, and you can go there and download literally anything that you need or want for free. And then it is so easy to find. Either you can heart it to save it to your favorites, or you can go back to your downloads and license keys, and it's right there in front of you with full copyright usage. So if you take anything from Creative Fabrica, rest assured you can use this for your items to resell. I will have the link to the stencils that I used down below, as well as a discount link for Creative Fabrica subscription. You get a free month or free 10 downloads, whichever comes first. So definitely take advantage of that if you don't already have a Creative Fabrica account. Now, I uploaded all of the stencils that I wanted to use to Design Space. We are using a 40-ounce Big Betty from TIPSY Magnolia, so it's a lot larger tumbler than I am used to working with because I usually do the 32-ounce or the 24-ounce plumps from Tipsy. So what I'm going to do is just make a shape the size of what would be a 32-ounce plump. I'm just going to rough pop these in there in that shape to know that they would completely fill up that space, and then I'm going to make a few extra. I absolutely could have measured the top portion of the Big Betty and then the bottom portion of it, created those two shapes and did the same thing, but this was, for whatever reason, the easiest in my head. So this is what we went with. So once I have all of these kind of rough in the shape of a 32-ounce plump, although we're doing a Big Betty, I did make them a little bit bigger because we're working with a bigger surface. And then I duplicated a few of them just so we could have, you know, those extra to compensate for the size difference in the tumblers. And let me tell you, there is nothing that I hate more than wasted space on vinyl because of how Design Space wants to situate them on the mat. So I'm going to show you how I cram all of these onto one mat. Sometimes you do have to take extra time to finagle them all in one area and twist and turn some of your images, but most of the time, if I'm doing some sort of stencil, I have plenty of room on one 12 by 12 mat to cut all of my stencils without it just throwing some extras on another and wasting some of that vinyl. Most of you probably already know that you can do this, but if you go to that mat that has those extra ones on there and hit the three little dots at the top, it will ask you if you want to move to another mat. So I'm going to move both of the ones that are on mat 2 to mat 1, and then we're just going to kind of play with it for a little bit to see if we can fit those all in this 12 by 12 space without overlapping them. I'm going to kind of do a pattern so they can alternate back and forth, which frees up some space in between each of our images. Like I said, it does take some extra time and a lot of moving around, and sometimes it doesn't even work out, but it does completely avoid cutting an irregular shape out of my vinyl, which annoys me. So we can cut a straight 12 by 12 sheet. We have no weird vinyl shapes left over, and my OCD is happy. Now, for your stencil, you never want to use a permanent vinyl or any vinyl that's going to leave a residue behind. So choose either a really good temporary vinyl or a stencil vinyl. I'm using the 405 stencil from Hobby Lobby. It's been a while since I bought some, but I feel like the pricing on this is a little high in comparison to a temporary vinyl. But it does cut really well, and it is so much easier to remove once you have once it's time to remove your stencil. It works a lot better, especially when you are doing a double glitter peekaboo like we are now. And because it removes much easier, and it's a little bit thicker than a temporary vinyl too, so you can see it a little bit better under that second layer of glitter. And as far as the settings go on my Cricut machine, I have the like original Air. My machine is, gosh, probably 10 years old. So I don't know if it's any different for the newer machines, but I do cut it on the vinyl, or I'm sorry, the iron-on setting. I cut it on the iron-on setting so that it cuts a little bit deeper. I can't talk, y'all. It normally does really well, but I'm not going to lie, there are times that I have tried using this stencil vinyl and it just wants to crumble up into a big ball on my machine and is a hot mess. If that happens, just use some removable vinyl. So since these have some fine detail in there, rather than just peeling them off, which is what I usually do by hand, I'm going to use some transfer tape. I don't want my transfer tape to be too sticky because the stencil vinyl is not as sticky as a temporary vinyl. So I popped this on my sweater a couple of times before using it on the stencil vinyl so it removes the tackiness from my transfer tape. Now the base color that is on, or the base glitter that is on our Big Betty is Mirage from PDB Creative Studio. If you saw my post in the Brittany Barnes Boutique Facebook group, I am unfortunately no longer with PDB Creative Studio. So I do not have a code, but I will have a link down below for y'all. So if you want this beautiful glitter, you can grab it for yourself. I did paint the tumbler gold, and then we applied the glitter using the epoxy method on this one. I patted my glitter down so it is nice and flat, and then I applied 2 coats of epoxy on top of my glitter, sanding lightly in between those layers, and then obviously we have sanded it before adding on our stencils. Now, if you sand before you add your stencils on, you want to make sure that you're using a very high grit sandpaper, which means you're going to have a very smooth sand, almost mattifying rather than really cutting down into the surface. If you use a low grit sandpaper, those really thick pieces of grit are going to make deep cuts into your epoxy. And then when you spray paint over top of your stencils, those grooves can allow the spray paint to go down underneath your stencils, causing your design not to be so crisp. So if you do have to sand, make sure you almost have a smooth surface before you do sand, and then use a very high grit so it's nice and smooth and buttery soft before you apply your stencils to it. Now, when you're doing a tumbler that has a deep indent or a groove like this one, you want to pick stencils that are not so large that you have to take them from top to bottom, or a large portion over that groove, because it's going to be really hard, since the top is larger and the bottom is smaller, to get your stencils to lay flat if you pick something very large. So what I try to do is put the biggest portion either above or below the groove. Then I will press the largest part of my stencil down first, remove the transfer tape, and then press small portions of my stencil down one at a time. You can even use your heat gun on the low heat setting to apply a little heat to those pesky little parts that want to still pop up, and your craft blade to get them to lay flat over that curved area. We're going to spray paint this once we have all of our stencils on with Cosmo from My Color Shot, one of my favorites. I have an e.l.f. makeup brush, which is going to give us a very smooth application for our full glue. And we're using the full glue from Southern Belle Glitter. Everything that you see is on my brush is all that I'm going to use. A little bit of this stuff goes a very long way. It's incredibly tacky. I've joked before that you could throw the cup to the wall and it would stick. So it is very, very tacky, and you do not need to apply this very thick at all. I'm going to very quickly go over the entire tumbler to get even coverage, And then I'm going to continuously work this into the tumbler until it begins to dry a little bit on me. It's going to go on the milky white color, and then once it starts to dry, it will go clear. Make sure you get all areas covered, and you don't want it bunching up around any of your stencils. So I'm going to go back and forth in the same motion. Once it begins to dry on me a little bit, I'm going to take my brush and dab it as I am now. That's going to help give a little bit of texture to it so that we have absolutely no streaking in our glitter once we apply. This will not work properly if you have way too much of this glue on here. You absolutely want to make sure that you have a thin, even coat, and then you can go and dab around the entire tumbler. Make sure that you are getting those areas that it's bunched up around your stencils, and you will get a perfectly smooth, with a little bit of texture coverage, so you will have no streaking in any glitter that you apply on top of this. Now, for a double peekaboo, my favorite cuts are 0.008 and below. So we're talking a extra fine cut of glitter or micas are going to work, or of course you can use fulls. You just don't want to use anything that is too thick of a cut, because then you won't be able to see any of your stencil vinyl. If you have large stencils, then you can put a dab of hot glue in the very center of your stencil so that you can find the stencil underneath the thicker, chunky glitter. But in this case, our stencils are very dainty and thin, so we want to use a fine glitter or mica so that we can find them underneath. Now guys, this is Rachel from Southern Belle Glitter. This is actually a full glitter. So when you apply a full wrap of full, I know you all are going to come at me for saying it like that. If you apply a full wrap of foil, maybe y'all can understand that better. And then, I'm cracking up at myself. Then you can throw this on top of it, and it is going to fill in those little gaps that may still be tacky. But we're just going to use it for the entire tumbler because it is absolutely gorgeous. We'll knock off any of that excess glitter, and then I'm just going to take a large paintbrush or chip brush and brush off any of that excess. Once I have done that, you can immediately go into spray sealing this. I'm going to use Rust-Oleum Matte Clear Coat and give it 2 good coats so that it seals all of this in, and then we can remove our stencils. Nowhere in this video does it justify how beautiful that Rachel actually is, so I wanted to pop up a little video to show you how sparkly it is in the sunlight. Gosh, it's such a pretty pink with a purple shift. It is just perfect for everything that we're doing on this tumbler. Once our spray paint has completely dried, do not get ahead of yourself and want to see what's underneath those stencils before your spray paint is dry, because it will start peeling up your glitter, okay? Do not be impatient like me. I always have to pull up a little teeny tiny spot, and it never fails. It peels up some of the spray paint or some of my glitter. Be patient and wait for your tumbler to dry. Once it's dry, remove your stencils and reveal your beautiful glitter underneath your stencils. We are going to remove all of those stencils and then go into giving this a coat of epoxy. I am using a little extra incorporated turbo fast set epoxy. This stuff is incredible. It is thin, so it's not going to be super thick on my tumbler, and I can keep my coats thin even though this is a multi-layer tumbler. It's not going to end up super thick at all in the end. This epoxy is incredibly clear, and you can even mix very large quantities. I'm actually mixing a large amount now because I was working on a couple of other tumblers that are not on camera. And I have plenty of time to apply it to all of my tumblers and torch without risking burning the epoxy because it is already setting up. This has a good probably 10 to 15-minute work window before it even starts setting up, and that's with a fast set, which is really impressive. Now, when applying to a big Betty like this or a tumbler that has removable handles, I do try to avoid putting it on the little pieces that you attach the handle back to, because we do not want the epoxy to build up on that, but it's almost unavoidable. So what I'm going to do once this is dry, between every layer of epoxy, I'm going to take my craft blade and trim off the excess from those little metal pieces, okay? We don't want it to continuously build up, because if it builds up throughout the process of the tumbler with all of those layers of epoxy, it's going to be much harder to cut that off, rather than if you just take a little bit of time and do it in between each coat of epoxy to keep them clean. To choose our entire theme, or everything that we have going on here, I started off with the tumbler. We have a hot pink lid and hot pink handle for this tumbler. So it's not technically a clean slate. We want to play off of that color without overdoing it. So I chose these flowers because they have the beautiful hot pink right in the middle of those roses. These florals are from my most recent collab with Gracefully Created. I'll have them linked below. When choosing colors for my base, when I'm working with florals like this, I want to choose contrasting colors. So there's a hint of the plumish, pinkish, whatever you want to call it, color in here, and hints of the hot pink. So we're going to choose colors that match them, but don't overtake the flower. So I wouldn't have used peach as a base because there is a lot of that peach in these florals. I chose the contrasting color of the pink that we have as a base on the tumbler. That is not a perfect match for the handle, and it's not a perfect match for the florals either. So it's going to really make these colors pop and kind of tie the entire design together. So since the bottom of this tumbler is curved, or it has a taper to it, I am going to cut as close as possible to the designs in these florals, and then I'm going to round it off so it appears as it's going to be one whole when I put them on the tumbler. I'm going to apply these in sections, and if I have to overlap in any area, I'm going to trim off the clear portion of the decal so that we're not having any clear overlap on the tumbler. You will be able to see that under epoxy. So I trim right up close to the florals, not leaving any clear behind. So if they do overlap in those areas, you won't be able to tell underneath the epoxy. Now when we're using the larger florals, I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the stencils. I'm only going to put a very small portion over that curve so that we are allowing the design to go over the curve, but we're not putting it in the center of it. That's going to help keep our florals smooth and not have any lumps or bumps in them or creases that we have to work out. So here I'm just putting those couple of leaves over the edge. And to do that, I'm cutting very close to the leaves. So once I apply, it's going to allow me to maneuver those leaves around individually rather than whole. I hope that makes sense, but you can see here I'm pressing those leaves down one by one because I have cut out around them. And I'm going to do the same thing for anything that I have going over that curve on the tumbler. The ones that I put at the top of the tumbler, I'm going to let them hang over until the end, and then I'll show you how I trim them off very nicely. Alright, so our florals that we allowed to hang over the top rim of the tumbler, I am going to take my heat gun and almost treat it like shrink wrap. So we're going to heat that up a little bit so it really sticks to the top, and then pull it over that top rim. Then we're going to take some scrap vinyl. It's a good way to use some of your scrap vinyl is to cut little pieces of it that you know for a fact you're never going to grab that vinyl again because you have used it so many times, and use it as like a painter's tape. Sometimes it is easier to use vinyl rather than the painter's tape because I find that if I cut really close to a painter's tape, it can leave some of those blue specks behind. And it's hard to see until, of course, after the project is finished. So I'm just cutting out a little scrap of vinyl. And we're going to place that a hairline away from the top rim. Then I'm going to take my craft blade and cut right along the edge of that. It is a temporary vinyl, so it's going to remove really easily. And then we're going to have a perfectly straight line on our florals. Now it's time to add on our decal. So if you are using a smooth vinyl, You're going to want to give your tumbler a coat of epoxy so the lines from your decals are not going to show underneath your vinyl decal that you add on top, okay? So if you're using a smooth vinyl, make sure that you do give your tumbler a coat of epoxy over top of those floral decals before you add on your main decal. We are going to use a textured vinyl as our first layer for our offsets, so that's not going to be necessary for us. I imported this beautiful mom design into Design Space, created a 0.035 offset for each of them, and then we are using TECKWRAPCRAFT metallic textured gold, the royal chrome pink, and then our mid layer is going to be this really pretty matte pastel pink to separate our chrome pink for the top layer and our textured metallic gold for our bottom layer. TECKWRAPCRAFT is my absolute favorite vinyl because it weeds so easily. It cuts very well on my machine every single time. I use the Vinyl Plus setting and I never have any trouble with it. So once I have weeded all of these designs, I did leave some of the little pieces in my letters because those are going to be difficult to weed off. I'm going to layer it first and then I will pull those off with a craft blade. If you have any trouble lining up your offsets, then use the hinge method to apply them. You can cut off a little bit of the backing of your decal, put your offset in behind it, and then either hold it up to a window or put it down on a light pad so that you can see the layers beneath your top layer. Then you can press that exposed piece of vinyl down and then remove the backing to reveal the rest of the back of your vinyl and press it down on top of your offset. If it's difficult to remove from the backing, then just use a squeegee tool to kind of roll it off the back as you're pressing down with your squeegee, and that will help remove it perfectly. All right, and once we have our decal layered up, we're going to apply it to our tumbler. I'm just going to put it in the center of the top portion of the Big Betty. There is a lot of space, and I usually cut my decals to 3.5 inches. You can go 3.75, even 4 inches on this, but since this was so detailed with wording, I didn't want the words to get lost over the edges or through the curves if I made it too wide. So I kept it at 3.5 inches wide, not including the 0.035 offsets. We added our final layer of epoxy and popped that handle back on there, and it was complete. I am so happy with the final result of this tumbler. It's been a while since I completed one like this, and it was so nice to jump back in my craft space and get this beautiful result. This video has absolutely no filters, no alterations to it. It is just pure beauty outside in the sunlight. Look at the shine of that a little extra epoxy. I'm telling you, for all the epoxies that I have used, this one just wows me every single time I complete a tumbler, or any project for that matter. I hope that y'all have enjoyed this tutorial and have learned a lot from it. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below and I'll answer them as quickly as possible. All materials with links and discount codes will be listed down below in the description as well. That is all for today. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next time.